For this episode of Coffee with Closers, I'm sitting down with Desai, founder and CEO of Swpely, a tool for saving and sharing modern content. Jay has extensive experience in growth marketing. Stay tuned for my conversation with Jay, where he shares practical advice for marketers and sales leaders on how to reach their target customers the most efficient way possible.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Coffee with Closers, where business leaders share insights on how to build businesses from the ground up and best practices for innovating in their industry.
Hey Jay, I'm super excited to have you join me for this episode of Coffee with Closers.
Excited to be here, Samuel. Thanks for having me.
Most certainly. And obviously, for the audience that may not have heard of you, can you share a little bit about your background?
Yeah, definitely. So my name's Jay. I used to be in B2B marketing. Now I'm a founder working on a business called Swpely. Kind of describe it as Pinterest for business people, essentially. So professional content instead of more lifestyle content. And as I mentioned before, being a founder, I was in B2B marketing. My last role specifically was head of growth at a company called Trend, where I helped grow them from 6 paying brands to 400 in a year. So that was a lot of fun over there. And before that, I was at a company called Career Plug, basically leading the marketing efforts over there, building out marketing from the ground up. So it's been a fun and interesting ride. I'm sure we'll probably be getting into a lot of the different stuff I've done and some of the stuff that I've learned as a result. But excited to be here and excited to share.
Yeah, I'm super pumped to have you talk a lot about growth hacks, as that's where kind of your entire career history has been. So obviously you've accomplished a lot. Like you said, now you're an entrepreneur. You recently started a podcast. You've been in growth marketing pretty much the entire career. You've accomplished a whole lot of things in your career. What's one thing that you're super proud of?
I would say the thing that I'm most proud of is probably what I'm working on right now, which is Swpely. And I guess like even more so than that is just my entire, even though it's short so far, but my entire entrepreneurial journey. I feel like, I have learned a lot in the previous roles that I've had, especially building out marketing and growth from the ground up. But I think it's even been further accelerated in my role as an entrepreneur and my role as a founder, just because I've kind of got to do it all. It's not just the marketing side, but it's the operations, it's the customer success, everything over there. And it's really kind of given me a great holistic view and understanding of how everything works together and how it plays in together. So that's probably been the most proud thing is just getting this project started and getting my entrepreneurial journey started.
Yeah, and you haven't talked about product and obviously finance and all, right? That's another part of an entrepreneurial journey. And I know right now, at least Swpely is freemium, and I'm assuming you probably have some sort of a revenue model in the future. So it's probably a lot different when you're just a free product versus a product that actually has some sort of a subscription or pricing behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're working on eventually building a consumer social version. So that's the big goal over there. So we're really in an understanding phase of how people are working within our product, what they like, what they dislike. And it's really all the basics that you kind of are taught in for marketing, where you're kind of trying to understand, what does your consumer do? What does your user do? What are their habits like? How are their habits in your platform? What can you do to kind of influence those habits as well and create new habits? So it's really kind of like in a discovery phase as well. So that's kind of the plan for the product, is we're going down a fully consumer social route. So the product, the basic offering will always be free, and then we'll probably layer that on with some more creator tools and things like that. Because that's kind of, I guess, like an evolution of my whole background of everything that I've been involved with is kind of being poured into here, and all my learnings being poured into this product.
Most certainly. So what actually is your why? What's the driver behind your motivation of just keep going?
Yeah, for me, it's really that a couple of things, I think. One, the problem is so close to my heart as someone who creates content on a pretty regular basis on LinkedIn, on Twitter, even having a podcast on the side and all of those things. I'm constantly not only creating content, but curating content, figuring out new ideas to talk about, new things to kind of understand and learn as well. So the problem is very close to me specifically, where, I found myself saving things from all over the place and being very disorganized and unable to kind of also for the discovery of new content. It's very on me. It's very on myself to kind of find new sources and things like that. So trying to shorten that cycle with Swpely and help other people discover better content as well. And then the other thing that keeps me really motivated is, I'm always curious to learn and I'm always hungry to learn. And I think having your own business is the best way to learn and figure out how to do things. I mean, it's really the chains are off. Not only that, but you also have to constantly figure out what's working, what's not working, where to go next as well. And so all of those things are really motivating for me. It's like waking up to a new challenge every single day. And, I get to have some control of how I want to approach and attack that challenge and decide on my own, like, what are the things I want to work on? What are the things that I don't want to work on anymore? So that's been a great experience so far, and excited to continue keeping to do that.
Talk about curating, which is a problem that I have. I have Apple Notes full of websites and blog links and YouTube channels and even just Instagram handles. And I think I'm still waiting on skipping my line on Swipely, because I think you have to invite like a couple hundred people to skip my line. So I'm working toward that. I think I'm still on waiting list. Maybe you can push me up a little bit.
Yeah, we could definitely get you bumped up.
So obviously, even though it hasn't been a long time, but you probably had some big challenges that you faced even just in the short while of building this company. Are there any challenges that come to your mind in terms of things that got in the way and how you were able to overcome as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for any entrepreneur that's starting something new is, the acquisition piece. Where are you going to find those first customers and first users? I think that's the biggest thing. You can work on product as much as you want. You can work on customer success as much as you want. You can work on operations as much as you want, but you've got to be able to find those first customers and users. And obviously, you can solve that problem and then you'll have other things to work on as well. But that's usually the biggest one. And that was the biggest challenge for me. As a first time founder over here, I don't have a huge amount of budget. I mean, I graduated college 3 years ago, so definitely don't have a lot saved up to spend on marketing. And so it was really trying to figure out ways to go to market for free, acquire customers for free or at very, very minimal cost, and thinking about those different things. So I think that was probably the biggest challenge, is our first 1,000 users. And I set a pretty high goal for Swipely to get our first 1,000 users within 30 days. And we ended up getting our first 1,000 users in 23 days, which was awesome.
Nice.
And so that was one of the biggest challenges for me. And I think now my current existing challenge is, making sure I'm understanding the right problem, the problem even better than I was previously, understanding how people are approaching that problem, how people want to solve that problem, and kind of putting that into building out the actual product. So, building out those product features, building out the user experience and things like that. So that's probably my biggest challenge now. But my first challenge, I think, was probably just the acquisition side of things.
So I have a question about that, because I thought the whole waitlist is a hack, right? Which I've seen a lot of SaaS companies, even before the product is ready, have that waitlist as a way to get people signed on and building that email user list. But you still have that waitlist. So I'm just curious, what exactly is the reasoning behind still having a waitlist and having, encouraging your new users that are signing up to invite more of their connections to basically skip the line?
Yeah, I think you answered some of it a little bit over there, which is, we want to encourage people to get other people to sign up. So that way we can continue to build that referral flywheel. I'm really big on flywheels, like whether it's content, whether it's acquisition, even retention, I think is really important to kind of build those flywheels. And so that's part of it. Obviously, it allows us to acquire more and more users. Another big part of it, and I think people that are listening that are in marketing will especially appreciate this, which is it's actually a really good way for us to get our email deliverability up. Now I don't worry about it too much because of the fact that we've just sent out so many emails and we have incredibly high open rates, like, close to like 50-60% on most of our flows, like close to 10% click-through rate and things like that. But that was kind of the beginning of the waitlist as well, was a way for us to kind of encourage users to communicate with us and say like, hey, I really need this solution. Can you let me in? When does the product come out? All of those things. And I think that was part of the waitlist too, is it kind of allows us to open up a conversation as well with these users, especially the users that are facing this problem the most. And so that was part of it as well.
So obviously, getting into entrepreneurship, you've been in the business world, you've helped a lot of companies grow. Were there any bad advice you received prior to starting your company that you're like, man, that was a dumb idea, that whoever was recommending that?
I think I don't think I can point to one specifically, but I'd say anything that's related to the typical playbook. Like I try and not grab any of that information that people share, like, oh yeah, you should be doing X, Y, and Z for marketing, or you should be doing this, or you should be trying that out. I think, a lot of us, especially if we have been in the space for a long time, whether you're working on your own business or you are at a business that you've been at for a while, usually really understands the problem and the market really well. I mean, even at my last job where I was working for someone, I think probably after 6 months, I felt like I really, really understood the core problem and things like that. And so, leaning on those learnings, I think a little bit more than whatever's external facing, where people are like, oh yeah, you need this to be better at marketing, or you need this to be better at sales, or whatever the case is. I think people actually know a lot more about what's going to work for their space than they might think that they know. And I think that's what's incredibly important, is, leaning into your own understanding of not only where your market is, but what your personal skills are. And I'll give you a great example over here. One of the things that I think probably a lot of people in the B2B space were really hot on last year, especially like last fall and the beginning of this year, was like Clubhouse. Great app for connecting with people, audio first platform. I think there is still some value there potentially as they continue to keep working on the platform. But for me personally, my skill and expertise has been in LinkedIn and Twitter. Those are platforms that I know really well, and I know that I can really work on really well. And so, making decisions like that, hey, even if there is a large audience out there for Clubhouse, what's the lowest hanging fruit? Not only from a perspective of where my market sits, but also where my skills sit at. And I think those are the two big things that I've tried to follow to help us grow really fast.
Yeah, and I think the shiny object syndrome, right? Like a lot of people, when they see the next new shiny object, they jump on it and then abandon everything else that they were building up to try to go experiment with that new thing. And oftentimes you lose momentum while you're trying to figure out this new platform or a new method. So I think that's a good reminder there. So obviously, you started this podcast as if you don't have enough to do, and you're obviously starting to interview other entrepreneurs, and especially in the e-commerce space. Are there any common themes that you're hearing from having interviewed some of these entrepreneurs that are building these direct-to-consumer brands?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of common themes across that translate over to B2B. I think the biggest thing is kind of like managing your time, figuring out where you can go deep in. And in terms of like scaling businesses, I think it's the same across the board, whether you're in B2C or B2B. It's really, focusing on those one or two things that you can be really good at, and then you can kind of continue to expand outward. And so, that's a lot of the advice that those other entrepreneurs give. And, the most common ones, like, you should continue to keep experimenting with things, figuring out what's working. And a lot of those things are the same over there. One thing that I've especially learned, that isn't necessarily crossing over it, and I'm trying to at least cross over a little bit from the B2C space, is just the way that, e-commerce interactions work between the customer and the seller, which is, they're almost instantaneous, right? You're shopping on your own, you're making that checkout process. And so that kind of drives a lot of my decisions as well, is, bringing that over. And I think what that looks like in the B2B space, if you have a product, is really like that product led growth and things like that. So that's really what I try and focus on in as well, is how can we create like the seamless experience for our users, for customers, those kinds of things, instead of, hey, come to our website, go schedule a demo. Now you've got to wait for someone to email you. Now you've got to wait for a proposal to come in. And I think those are steps that are necessary for, those really big enterprise deals and things like that. But for most cases, most of the times you're speaking directly with the decision maker or things like that, or it's the tool or platform or service is relatively inexpensive, so it's not necessarily like one of those long buying processes. So figuring out how to translate some of those things from B2C, where they really have like a very short sales cycle, into the B2B things, has been really fun for me to experience as well and try.
Yeah, and I think especially in the B2B space, some of us still think, we're marketing to a business, but we often forget that we're still marketing to a person, and that person is still making a lot of purchase decision on their own, and they're making, instant decisions on what kind of products to consume and buy. They are also trying to, kind of mimic that same experience in the B2B purchase journey as well, and oftentimes we overlook that. So I think that's a good reminder. How can we still look at some of this, really successful B2C companies or, direct-to-consumer companies and see what they're doing real well, and can we emulate some of their success in the B2B environment? We're seeing that more and more in the SaaS sector, right? With the freemium model, get you hooked and then naturally upgrading it, and before you know it, you have, you invited your colleagues as users, and you pretty much sign for enterprise software with a little or no interaction with the sales reps. I mean, it's just crazy to even imagine that. And I think HubSpot is successfully doing it, even though they have a pretty massive sales organization behind, but they still are giving users the freedom to just explore on your own and sign up when you're ready.
Yeah. And I think and this might be a controversial statement, maybe not, but I think every business, regardless of whether you have the $10,000 a month deal or the $10 a month deal, should be offering some sort of freemium product, whether you're rolling it in under your own like parent brand, or whether you build out something that's next to your product suite or anything like that. I think it's incredibly important for all businesses to do that. And the reason for that is, if you're not doing that, there is going to be a business out there that's going to offer something that's maybe freemium or low cost to kind of not only pull you in. And the reason they are pulling those people in successfully is because for those people on the other end, the end buyer, that pain point is just so strong and so like top of mind that they need something immediately. They don't want to go through a long sales cycle. They don't want to go through a long purchase cycle. And I think you're going to start to see more of that, especially for the executives and senior level employees that really want to drive fast growth, fast results, and things like that. Just the nature of it. We have so much access to tools and platforms and services and resources out there today that if you really want to drive that hyper growth, you're going to be looking for that solution today. If the pain point is really big and sticky, you don't want to wait 3 or 6 months to implement something that may or may not end up driving the needle.
Yeah, I do have a follow-up question on that. And one thing was mostly around like early adopters. And I think the early adopters are more likely to just want to go try it before they even tell their colleagues, like, hey, I want to try to solve this problem using a tool. But are there any recommendations or example you've seen where a service company adapting more of a freemium model, because it's a lot harder to do on a service level, right? Especially if there's a lot of human capital involved in delivering a service. How could they try to mimic what a SaaS company is able to do, but with a service product?
Yeah, I think with a service product specifically, maybe it's offering some sort of product that goes to the service. I think in terms of from a human capital perspective, like obviously like, you don't want to give away free work necessarily with people, but if you can use some of the revenue that you've generated with existing customers and maybe offer some sort of product to hook people in or something like that, that can be a really good opportunity over there. I'm thinking of those those free SEO like checklist things or website checkers or anything that's like helping to like grade or something like that, or examples that people can kind of like plug and play. Those are really good examples. And there's a lot of like low code and no code solutions nowadays that you can use to build out those products. But I think that's probably the best way. It's really hard to offer services for free because that's usually like time, and time is one of the most valuable resources for any business. But if you're a service-based business, I think that's the best approach you can do over there is, offer some sort of those really like minimal low code, no code products that can kind of sit on your website and people can kind of use and interact with, that still live in the same sphere of what you're working on, and things like that.
Yeah, because I know, everybody has like, schedule a free consult, and everybody knows that's a sales conversation, and we all shy away from those free consults, right? Because it's nothing more than a deep discovery and trying to find out what your pain is and try to figure out what's your buying criteria and all that, and we already know the script. So I think, like you said, using, your knowledge to maybe build a product that can actually be a leader to get those people to convert, and then figure out whether you can convert them into a paying customer later on.
Yeah, exactly. And I totally agree with that. And, another example might be, if you are doing like helping businesses with like user experience and accessibility for websites, maybe you have like one of those checkers where you can insert your website and it can tell you like whether your website meets like accessibility standards or things like that. So super small things that can be really helpful for helping a business to decide like whether they might need someone externally or they want to try and fix it themselves. I think there's also so many resources out there nowadays where we can first of all kind of figure out like what the alternatives look like and whether or not we actually want to do something in-house or do something outside. And so you've got to be aware that buyers have access to that information today, and there's just more and more information growing over time. So no one's just going to agree to work with you because you've shoved your sale down their throat. It's really got to be like, okay, hey, in terms of the time that it's going to take me to fix this or work on this or grow this, obviously my time and skills can be better spent somewhere else. And I think that's got to be the key thing over there is flipping that mentality and making people think like, okay, you should get back to doing X, Y, and Z where your real skills are, rather than trying to figure this out on your own, right? Like, so for example, like SEO specifically, like, hey, you don't need to be the one that's putting together the checklist and stuff like that. You could be better served spending time on creating the actual content or whatever that is, or updating the content or creating video content or whatever that is, rather than spending your time doing like on-page SEO optimization or off-page SEO optimization. So those are some examples over there. And I think that's what's really important to understand.
Most certainly. So let's talk growth hacking. Obviously, you pretty much spend however many years you've been in marketing, in doing user acquisition and growth hack. Hack usually has a negative connotation in people's mind, but in the marketing world, especially in the SaaS and technology space, people understand growth hacking. Can you kind of define what you mean growth hacking?
Yeah, I think growth hacking, it does definitely have a negative connotation to it. But I think what it really comes back to is what's the item that I can do the least amount of action for and create the highest amount of impact. And so I think that's what sits at the root of any sort of, quote unquote growth hacks, is the fact that you want to create high impact with doing low action. And not necessarily because you're like lazy or anything like that, but it's the fastest way to continue to learn. And, the more impact you create, the more learnings you get, the faster you can optimize and things like that. So that's kind of what I would define growth hacking as in my book.
And how has your approach on marketing evolved over the years?
Yeah, it's really been to have more of those low action activities. How can I continue to get stuff and produce stuff out there at the lowest amount of action? And then we continue to see how the market reacts, right? We continue to see what did they like, what did they dislike, what kind of worked, what was really easy and scalable to continue keep doing, and how does that match up with the market? And that's how to like understand some of those things. So even in a another project I actually just recently started this last week. I'm working on a project called Growth Kit, which is basically a list of tools and over 200 tools and resources for startups, small businesses, and solopreneurs to use to really scale their business. Putting together information around 200 tools and resources is a lot of effort. And so it's really like breaking down those bigger projects into smaller things. So one of the things that I'm doing over there, for instance, instead of filling out all 200 items and then uploading them all at once, is, what are the 20 most important items over there that I can fill out? And then what are maybe the 3 to 4 key things that people will want to look at? And I know it's not going to take me a ton of time to fill that out for those 20 items. And then I get that information and I post that, and then I come back and I add more stuff over time. And so that's what I think is really big over there, is like you want to continue to keep growing over time. Not everything has to be perfect when you send it out. And one thing I always like to remind everyone else, no one knows what the end product or the end solution looks like except for yourself, unless you've gone out and told a bunch of people. So, if you, for this project Growth Kit specifically, if I went out and told people, yeah, we're going to have 400 tools and resources, they would be expecting 400 tools and resources. But if I told them, hey, I'm going to have 400 tools and resources, but we're only going to have the first 20 out at once, or maybe if I even said like, hey, like we just launched this with 20 tools and resources, that's it, no one would know that I'm going to eventually add another 380 tools and resources to this list. So I think that's a really big one, is, creating the right expectations and managing those expectations over there as well.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times as marketers, right, we have a perfection issue that we need to have it like perfect and polished before we can present it. Oftentimes, by waiting for perfection, we never get some of these things done. So I like your idea of just get it live, then you keep adding on to it, as opposed to waiting until you have all 400 of them sorted out.
Yeah.
Which is a good advice. So obviously the biggest weakness that we all have is, even you can have all the resources, you can have a growth hack, but if you don't have the audience, you can't get the traction that you're looking for. So are there any, growth hacks on the traffic and also getting attention and eyeballs for someone who's just trying to get that momentum?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, first I'll preface, and I'll give some examples as well. But before I give some examples, I'll preface and say it's going to depend on your business. And that goes back to what we talked about earlier, right? That your business better than probably everyone else, and what's going to work and what's not going to work, right? If I gave you a tip for how to talk with people online, but your market only still connects via phone, it's not going to work, right? It's not going to translate over. So I'll preface it with that. But in terms of specific tips and examples that I can give, some of the ones that are really coming up, I think that are really important is like, working especially with micro influencers and other creators and things like that. We do a lot of that at Swpely. We've worked with a lot of creators and influencers. And that's really because, those people, a lot of them, if you find the right ones, have already their established like audience hub. And you want to connect with the ones that have the audience within your space and whoever your target market is. But the great thing about working with those people is like, instead of having to go build that audience from scratch, which can be really time consuming, you're able to kind of skip that step a little bit over there. So that's one approach that you can do. And then the other approach I would say is just really figuring out where is your audience talking? Like where are they communicating? Where are they spending time? And then really, I guess it kind of connects back to what I talked about with the influencer example as well, is, if you don't have the audience, if you find out what the channel is that your audience is communicating on and exists on and spends the most time on, but you don't have an established audience there, who can you find that is on that platform already that has the audience there that exists and things like that? So I think that's one of the biggest things is like, one of the most underrated things for acquisition is partnering with other businesses, partnering with other creators, those kinds of things that already have like established audiences. And then you've kind of got to figure out what is the value add that I can deliver to these people. Is that money? Is that an affiliate program? Is that, potential ownership in the business itself too? lots of different factors, and you've got to get creative. It's going to depend on how many resources you have on yourself. But I think that's what it really comes down to is finding where that audience is, and then whether you have the audience there, or do I need to find someone that has an audience that already exists on that channel?
So I know with demand gen, right, and as anything with marketing and leadership, always have the expectation of positive ROI. And especially when you're trying early days, trying to build a brand, try to create that audience that you're referring to, you may not have direct impact on, leads and opportunities and deals that's generated. So how do you normally measure success from those sort of efforts that may not be able to tie back to revenue?
Yeah, I think you've got to find what that North Star metric is, and that most important metric. So, if you're a product-based company, for us, for instance, our big metric that we track for is content added. So whenever someone saves something from another website or uploads content to Swpely, that's our North Star metric. So, we obviously are giving the product away for free. So we're not tracking revenue in that sense. That's not our ROI. But if we know that we're able to get people to create content, that's our biggest thing that we can drive. And figuring out where are the users that we can acquire that are going to create content the fastest. And so you've got to figure out what that metric is for any business. And if you're a service-based business, it's the same thing. What is that North Star metric that's going to guide you? And it's going to differ from platform to platform. It kind of depends on how you can figure out and be really process oriented on this to figure out what's going to work. So for instance, to give another example as well, we recently started posting on LinkedIn. We're sharing like some of the curated content that Swipely users are saving and sharing and things like that. And so one of the things that I've kind of understood and figured out there is, hey, if we're able to generate a higher number of impressions over there, we're able to drive more clicks back to our website, which eventually creates more signups, which goes downstream to that content added North Star metric. And so, that metric that's right there next to us is, how many impressions can we create? So it's not necessarily the content added piece, but we know since it works downstream that that's the metric that we're going to look at and potentially optimize for over there. And so it's having a really close understanding over there, being able to gather those qualitative and quantitative data points, and then kind of figuring out how it connects to your greater business. So if you don't have immediate money, dollars ROI, it's really okay, it connects back to this same basic concept of, can you get some sort of time ROI on this? What's the thing that I can spend the least amount of action on and create the most amount of impact? And I think that's true whether you're on dollars ROI or whether you're on ROI of something else as well.
Mm-hmm. Most certainly. Are there any major companies that or CMOs or any growth hackers that you follow specifically for inspiration or ideas or you just admire some of their marketing strategies?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot out there. We could probably do a whole episode on who those favorite creators are. Some of the ones that I really follow very closely. Stephen McDonald is great on LinkedIn. Camille Trent is great on LinkedIn. Jeremy Moser is great on Twitter. He's got a lot of actionable insights and things like that. And one thing I'll recommend is, because like I said, I could go forever on this list, is when you get to some of those profiles, if you're on Twitter, there's a see more section. You can see other people like that. And even on LinkedIn, you can go to someone's profile and see more and connect with some of those other folks on there as well. So those are some of the big ones that I kind of follow. There's a lot of great creators and marketers and business people out there giving solid, actionable advice. I think the ones that are going to be most important for anyone is, someone that's in that same space as you, working on something similar, some sort of same project and things like that is where you'll probably be able to learn the most from.
Yeah, and then I know you've said Twitter and LinkedIn being one of your two primary platforms that you study and spend a lot of time on. Have you seen any sort of common trends across these really good LinkedIn influencers? What are they doing really well that's getting them the attention and audience?
Yeah, I think it's really finding your own voice, being consistent. I'll be the first to say I'm not the best at that because I've got a lot of projects going on. But I think it's really important to find your own voice on there. If you're going to be talking about, outbound outbound sales, like that's what you've got to focus on, and that's the content that your audience is going to expect you to deliver them. Versus, if you're talking about video marketing or creating like videos or like optimizing for YouTube, like that's what your audience is going to be sitting on there. So it's not only enough to like kind of figure out what your voice is and grow on that, but also you've got to understand that when people start following you and paying attention to you, they're following you and paying attention to you for that specific purpose. So that's kind of like the content that you've got to feed that audience, and you can definitely expand outward from there and things like that. But I think that's kind of the core thing, is you've got to focus in on finding your voice and continuing to double down on your voice and what works. And one other tip I'll add over there, especially for Twitter and LinkedIn, is, if you're working on building your own personal brand, track your own personal metrics. I mean, see what are the posts that are giving you the most reactions, the most impressions, the most comments, the most likes. All of that stuff is incredibly valuable to figure out what really resonates with your audience, and that's where you can kind of start doubling down from.
Most certainly. Well, here's a hypothetical question. Obviously, you're a founder and you're trying to grow the company. If you were to get a $1 million check on go and spend on marketing, how would you allocate that money?
I don't know if I'd allocate the full budget to marketing. I'd probably try and push some of it towards product. But if I had to spend it on marketing, for me specifically, I'd be looking to, first of all, probably spend some ad dollars on specifically highly targeted spaces. So for us, we know that most of our ideal users are subscribing to professional content. And so, I'd be running some placements in like Morning Brew, The Hustle, maybe a little bit on Facebook ads, but that would just be with the audience that we've already acquired. I don't really like going after new audiences with that money. It's kind of like, how do you feed that frequency loop over there? So that's probably what I'd spend on a little bit over there as well. So it would really be a lot of like niche advertising places and stuff like that is where I'd spend a majority of that money. And if I was able to move any of that into product, you'd probably hear me saying that I'd probably spend like 90% of that money on product, actually. And what I'd do is, I'd like to spend some of the time researching, talking to customers, understanding their behaviors and what they're doing in the product quantitatively, and then using that knowledge and understanding to kind of influence the product experience as well. Because I'm a big product-led growth guy, and I think that is the best way to grow, especially if you have a product. And so that's where I would spend the money on. And if I was a service-based business, I'd probably spend it on what we had talked about earlier, which is some sort of tool or platform to kind of assist and do some of the selling for the service that's being offered.
Awesome ideas. So let's talk productivity hacks. As entrepreneurs, we have the least amount of is our time, right? So are there any productivity hacks that Jay has that helps him get a lot more stuff done in a day?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is time. I'll name a few, actually. Time blocking is a big one for me. Just blocking off that time, no meetings, getting into deep work over there. And the other big one I will say is saying no. It sounds really simple to do, but I don't think it's practiced often enough. We often think that we can manage more than we're actually capable in terms of time in a day. We only have 24 hours, maybe 7 to 8 hours of that goes into sleeping, maybe a couple of other hours on meals, maybe a few other hours elsewhere on hobbies and things like that. And so the amount of time that you really have to actually do deep work in a day is very low and very minimal. So, saying no can be one of the biggest assets for increasing your productivity. And the last thing I'll add is knowing when to stop, knowing when something's not working. You maybe try to do it a few different ways as well, and it's not working, and knowing when something's not working and knowing when and how to pivot is incredibly important to kind of keep going, so you don't get beat up too much on whatever you're working on.
Most certainly. Well, I'm glad you didn't say no to me when I asked to join me for a podcast. One last question. What advice would you give your younger self?
The advice I'd give my younger self is probably just to get started earlier. and I think not as many tools and resources existed then. I mean, I'm not terribly old. I'm like 26 years old, but I still, not everything, we didn't have all these fancy no code platforms 10 years ago or anything like that. But today I tell people to just get started, start creating. What's the simplest thing that you can do? Like, if you want to create a product, maybe use like a no code platform or a low code platform, or if you want to start building your own personal brand, start creating. It's easier than it's ever been to create content, whether it's visual, whether it's written. It's easier than ever to connect with other people. So just doing a lot more of those actions and doing a lot more testing. I think that's the biggest thing for me that I've learned is the faster that you're able to start, the faster that you're able to test, the faster you're able to find what works and what's that thing that's going to provide that income and stuff like that to help support you, not only personally but also business wise for growth. So that's probably what I would tell my younger self is just get started earlier, try a few things out, try a few simple things out, see what works, and then continue to try and scale from there.
Wow, I had 20 some other questions that I wanted to ask you, so maybe we'll do another episode sometime in the future. But Jay, I certainly appreciate your time. Thanks for sharing some of your experience and wisdom with my audience, and wish you all the best with Swpely.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me on this podcast, Samuel.
Thank you.
This episode of Coffee with Closers is brought to you by One IMS, a leading digital marketing agency helping businesses win new customers. To request a free marketing ROI audit, please visit oneims.com. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. To make sure you never miss an episode, please subscribe.